The banners of the north flapped weakly against the damp wind as Robb Stark rode along the banks of the Green Fork. His crown of bronze and iron felt heavier than ever, though it was not the weight of metal pressing on him, but the weight of responsibility. He had been called the Young Wolf, king in the north, breaker of oaths and commander of men. Yet behind the eyes that had seen too much battle for his years, there was a quiet, nagging doubt. How could a boy of 19 truly be a king? That night, as the camp settled into the uneasy stillness that came after weeks of march, Robb wandered beyond the firelight. Grey wind padded silently at his side, golden eyes flashing like embers in the dark. The river whispered its endless song, and the moon hung low, casting silver across the rippling current. Robb closed his eyes, thinking of Winterfell, of his mother's warm counsel, of his father's calm, stern voice. And then he heard it, a low, rumbling growl in the sky, not thunder, not storm, something older, something deeper. Grey wind stiffened, hackles raised, a growl rising from his throat. Robb looked upward, and his breath caught. Through the veil of clouds broke a shadow vast enough to blot out the stars. Wings spread like great sails, each beat shaking the air itself. And then came the fire. A streak of orange and red split the night as the creature descended, its roar like the fury of 1,000 storms. A dragon. Robb froze where he stood, torn between awe and terror. Stories told by old men at Winterfell had seemed like fairy tales, relics of the Targaryen's age long past. Yet here it was, a living beast of flame and scale. Its eyes burned like molten gold, and its talons sank into the earth with a crack that sent tremors beneath Robb's boots. Grey wind did not flee. Instead, the direwolf stood his ground, teeth bared, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The dragon lowered its head, smoke curling from its nostrils, and for a moment Robb thought it would strike until its gaze fixed on him. Something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts exactly, but a pull, a connection that tightened around Robb's heart like a chain forged of heat and destiny. His breath caught, his chest burned, and in that instant he understood. The dragon was not an enemy. It was a challenge. He took a step forward. Then another. Grey wind pressed close, ears flat but not retreating. Robb laid a hand against the warm, scaled snout of the beast. It was like touching a forge, the heat searing, yet his skin did not blister. The dragon exhaled, a hot gust that whipped his hair back. Its eyes narrowed, then softened, as though recognizing something buried deep within him. That night, under the moonlight and the gaze of gods old and new, Robb Stark became a dragon rider. The weeks that followed were a blur of fire and sky. He named the dragon Skulldrake, for its scales were black as obsidian and ridged like the bones of the dead. The beast accepted him with a wild, unyielding bond, as if the blood of the first men and the old magic of the north had whispered its blessing into his veins. Some whispered he had Targaryen blood hidden in his line. Others said the old gods themselves had willed it. Robb cared for none of it. All he knew was that with Skulldrake he was no longer just the young wolf. He was fire and fang, fury on wings. And when the whispers of Walder Frey's invitation reached his ears, offering bread and salt, promising forgiveness for broken vows and the joining of houses, Robb's heart darkened. His advisors debated, his mother begged caution, but Robb's hand often strayed to the reins of Skulldrake. He did not trust the Freys, not truly, but if treachery awaited, then for once the Starks would not arrive unarmed. The dragon's roar echoed across the twins, long before Robb set foot in the hall of Lord Frey. The twins stood tall and grim above the river, their towers looming like two crooked teeth in the mouth of a hungry wolf. The banners of House Frey flapped from the ramparts, though even from a distance, Robb thought they looked more like surrender flags than proud heraldry. The camp outside the castle had settled in with uneasy silence. Men whispered among themselves of fray treachery, of insult and slight, of the dangers of broken oaths. Robb said little. He had learned to let men talk while he thought, yet in his chest the fire of Skulldrake's presence burned steady. The dragon rested on a far ridge, coiled in the mist like a mountain come alive, its scales blending with shadow and stone. Few dared speak of it aloud, though the camp was filled with the stench of awe and fear. Some prayed it was a gift from the gods. Others muttered it was a curse. Catelyn Stark looked at her son with sharp, haunted eyes. "Walder, Frey does not forgive," she said, her voice low. "He hides his knife in smiles, Robb. Do not mistake bread and salt for safety." Robb clasped her hand. "And if he means betrayal, mother, then he shall learn what fire tastes like." That night, the hall of the twins blazed with torchlight, filled with music and laughter that felt too loud, too forced. The Freys put on their masks of merriment, serving roasted meats, filling goblets to the brim, their jests brittle as dry twigs. Robb wore his crown and his solemn face, grey wind at his feet, his mother beside him. The music scraped at his ears, a mockery of joy. Walder Frey himself sat like a vulture at the high table, lips wet with grease, his smile a rotten thing. "A happy joining of our houses," he croaked, raising his cup. "A feast to heal old wounds." Robb lifted his goblet, but did not drink. His eyes swept the hall, every detail seared into his mind. The crossbows half hidden behind draperies, the nervous glances of serving men, the way the musicians played not with joy, but with hands that trembled. He felt the bond stir inside him. Outside, far beyond the hall's stone walls, Skulldrake shifted, sensing his rider's unease. Then came the song. "The Rains of Castamere." The first note struck, sour and sharp, and every hair on Robb's neck rose. Grey wind growled low, his golden eyes burning. Robb's hand closed around the hilt of his sword, and the trap was sprung. The doors slammed shut, crossbows lifted, knives were drawn from sleeves. The music turned into a dirge, and in that moment Lord Walder's mask slipped into a sneer. "Your Grace," he hissed, "did you think us so easily bought?" Bolts flew. The hall erupted in screams. Northern men fell where they sat, pierced through the chest, throats cut, backs stabbed. Catelyn's cry split the air, and Robb surged to his feet, his sword flashing in the torchlight. But even as he struck down a Frey guard, he did not cry out in despair. He cried out in command. "Now!" The walls of the hall shook with a roar not made by men. Windows burst from their frames, showers of stone and glass raining down as Skulldrake descended upon the twins like a storm out of hell. The dragon's wings tore the night apart, its shadow swallowing the tower's whole. Fire spewed from its maw, a torrent of red-gold flame that turned stone black and flesh to ash. The roof of the hall groaned and split as Skulldrake's talons ripped through it, his roar deafening, his breath an inferno. Frey men shrieked as fire washed over them, tables overturned, banners curled into smoke. Panic spread like plague, but there was nowhere to run. The feast turned into a furnace. Robb stood in the heart of it, grey wind at his side, both wreathed in flames glow, but untouched, as though the fire itself had bent around its master. He raised his sword, the dragon's roar answering it, and in that moment he was no longer just the young wolf. He was the wolf of fire. Catelyn stared at him in shock, her face pale and lined with both horror and awe. "Guards," she whispered, "what have you become?" Walder Frey tried to crawl from his high seat, coughing, his skin blistered. "You stark devil," he croaked. But Robb did not hesitate. With a swing of steel, he ended the old man's words forever. The Red Wedding had been written as a dirge for the North. Instead it became a song of vengeance, played in fire and screams. And as the hall collapsed in flame, Robb Stark walked through smoke and blood, the crown upon his head, glowing red in the firelight. The smoke of the twins lingered for days, thick and choking, blackening the sky as if the gods themselves had lowered a curtain over the Frey lands. The charred ruins smouldered, towers collapsed, bridges warped by fire. What had been a castle, of stone for generations, was now nothing but a blackened carcass, its lord burned to bone and ash. Robb Stark stood upon the scorched earth, the crown still on his head, his sword sheathed at his side. Grey wind prowled beside him, his fur streaked with soot. Above, Skulldrake circled lazily, his vast wings stirring the smoke like storm clouds. The dragon's cry echoed across the riverlands, a sound that carried for miles, a sound that no man alive mistook. The North remembered. Survivors of the Frey betrayal had fled, whispering wild tales in every inn and village along the Trident, of how Walder Frey had betrayed his guest, of how the North had nearly been slaughtered, and of how a dragon had torn the sky open in vengeance. Some called it madness, others blasphemy, but most spoke with awe. The young wolf rides a dragon, the Starks have fire. The news travelled faster than horse or raven. By the time Robb's host began its march northward, all the riverlands were ablaze with rumour. In taverns, peasants whispered that the old gods had given the Starks their vengeance. In keeps, lords debated whether to fear him or follow him. And in King's Landing, the Iron Throne stirred uneasily. Catelyn Stark watched her son with eyes filled with both pride and dread. She had seen kings before, but what stood beside her now was something else. Not just a king, but a figure half-bred of myth and fire. She feared for him, feared for the cost. "You have changed, Robb," she said softly one evening as they camped near Seaguard, the sea air sharp in their lungs. "I was changed the day father's head fell," he replied. His voice was calm but hard as iron. "This is no longer only war, Mother. This is survival. The Freys thought to end my line, but instead they forged me into something they cannot kill. Even dragons may fall," she warned. Robb looked to the sky, where Skulldrake's wings glimmered in the moonlight. "Perhaps, but while he flies, the North will not bow," and bow they did not. When word reached Winterfell, the lords of the North bent knee once more with fiercer loyalty than before. The Boltons, who had turned quietly to thoughts of betrayal, were forced back into line by fear of dragonfire. The Manderleys sent forth ships laden with men and provisions, declaring Robb not only king in the North, but lord of fire and winter. From the mountains, the clans descended, eager to follow the boy who had turned treachery into ash. Even in the Vale, where Littlefinger spun his webs and Lisa Tully whispered her madness, the small folk began to murmur, if the wolf could ride fire, then perhaps the Starks were destined to rule not just the North, but all the 7 kingdoms. But not all voices sang in reverence. In King's Landing, Joffrey Baratheon raged upon his throne, screaming for vengeance, demanding dragon hunters, calling Robb a demon in wolf's skin. The Lannisters feigned calm, but behind their silks and courtiers' smiles, unease gnawed at their pride. Tywin Lannister himself was said to have turned pale at the first Raven's news, muttering that history had returned to haunt them. Dragons had once made the Targaryens kings, now one roared in Stark hands. Across the narrow sea, whispers stirred in the free cities. Merchants spoke of a silver-haired girl with dragons of her own, a claimant to the throne of old Valyria's line. And now, in Westeros, a wolf with a beast of fire had risen. The world shifted, the game grew more perilous, and even in distant Karth and Pentos, men wondered, would fire meet fire? For Robb Stark, such distant worries mattered little. His heart was fixed on one vow: the North would never kneel again. The Freys had shown him the cost of mercy. The Lannisters had shown him the price of hesitation. Now, with Skulldrake's shadow stretching over every battlefield, he would carve his vengeance in fire until the South remembered what the North had suffered. That night, as his host lit their campfires, Robb stood apart, his eyes on the stars. Skulldrake landed beside him with a thunderous crash, folding his wings, his massive head lowering until his golden eyes met Robb's. The bond pulsed between them, fire and blood, wolf and worm. Robb rested his hand on the dragon's scales and whispered, "Together we will break them all." The dragon's growl rolled like thunder across the dark plain, sealing the vow in flame. The march south was unlike any the Riverlands had ever seen. Thousands of northern men tramped behind their banners, their boots drumming a steady thunder across the war-torn fields. Lords carried grim faces, their eyes hardened by the smoke still lingering from the fray's ruin. But it was not only the sight of their host that struck terror into the hearts of villages and keeps, it was the shadow above. Skulldrake soared with them, his wings stretched wider than the masts of ships, his roar rolling across the valleys like the voice of doom. Farmers dropped their plows to the soil and ran for cover at his passing. Lords in their towers fell to their knees at the sight. Never since the days of Aegon's conquest had a dragon ridden so openly across Westeros. Robb Stark had become more than a king. He was now a myth carried in the flesh, a wolf with fire at his call. And with each day of march, his legend spread. When they reached the fords of the Trident, the Lannisters made their first stand. A host, commanded by Sir Adam Marbrand and reinforced by bannermen of House Lefford, barred the crossing, banners red and gold blazing against the northern grey. They had chosen their ground well, their catapults strung with ropes of tar and pots of wildfire, their crossbowmen lining the banks. Robb rode to the front of his host, grey wind padding beside his horse, his crown gleaming under the sun. He raised his voice so that all could hear. "They think the river shall hold us, but no river stops fire." Then he raised his hand, and Skulldrake answered. The dragon came screaming from the sky, his maw opening to spew a torrent of flame that turned the riverbank into a furnace. Men shrieked as their armor ran molten upon their flesh. Horses reared, their riders cast screaming into the torrent. The wildfire meant for the north ignited in Lannister hands, their siege engines erupting into emerald infernos that devoured their own men. Robb's army roared its battle cry and surged forward. Northern steel clashed with burning Lannister shields, but it was hardly a battle at all. It was slaughter. By nightfall the Trident ran red with blood, and the survivors fled west, their banners cast into the mud. The tale of the burning of the Trident spread even faster than the ruin of the Freys. Songs were sung of how the young wolf had ridden fire across the river, how the Lannisters' pride had turned to ash in their own flames. Yet not all were songs of glory. Ravens flew to King's Landing, carrying news of dread. In the Red Keep, Joffrey Baratheon raged and spat, demanding Robb's head, demanding Skulldrake's death. "I am the king!" he screamed, his voice shrill, his hand slapping the arm of the Iron Throne. "I'll have his dragon's skull mounted where all can see." But Tywin Lannister said little. His eyes burned with the cold fury of a man who understood the stakes better than any boy king could. He remembered well how 3 dragons had made the 7 kingdoms kneel. One had risen again, and worse, it was bound not to a Targaryen, but to a Stark. The lion's grip on the realm was slipping. Behind closed doors, the Lannisters whispered. Spies and maesters debated whether the beast could be killed with scorpions, as had been attempted in old wars. Gold was sent east to hire sellswords and assassins, some even muttering of poison for the beast. Yet Tywin knew well, to slay the dragon you must slay its rider. Far to the east, across the Narrow, see, another shadow stirred. In Meereen, Daenerys Targaryen received word of a wolf riding a dragon in Westeros. Her hands trembled as she read the scroll. The last of House Stark was no ally of hers, but the blood of Valyria ran in her veins, the bond of dragon and rider. Was hers by right, was it not? And yet the wolf had stolen the fire. Her counsel urged her patience, but in Daenerys' heart a fire greater than any dragon burned. She whispered to Drogon, to Rhaegal, to Viserion, "We are not alone in the sky anymore." Back in Westeros, Robb sat in his tent with maps spread before him. Lords gathered close, their eyes flicking between parchment and the beast outside that cast shadows against the canvas walls. "They will come for us with everything they have," Catelyn warned. "The Lannisters will not rest until you and your dragon are dead." Robb's eyes burned with that same hard fire. "Let them come. Every Southron lord who kneels to the lions will learn that winter is not the North's only weapon." And outside, as though in answer, Skulldrake loosed a roar that shook the night, a promise of fire yet to come. The night after the victory at the Trident, Robb Stark sat in the quiet of his command tent, staring at the map stretched before him. His lords argued outside, their voices like the howling of wolves. Some cried for him to march on King's Landing, at once, to put the dragon to use before the Lannisters could rally. Others urged caution, begging him to return to Winterfell and secure the North against treachery. Catelyn's voice cut through the clamour when she entered. "Your men see fire and think it makes you invincible," she said, her tone stern. "But you are still mortal, Robb. Fire does not change the game, it only makes it more dangerous." Robb looked up, weary but unbending. "The game changed the moment Walder Frey betrayed me. The Lannisters believe they can buy and bleed the realm into obedience. I will show them a fear they cannot purchase away." Outside, Skulldrake shifted, his low growl rumbling like thunder across the camp. Even the seasoned soldiers stilled at the sound, their arguments shrinking to mutters. To them, the dragon was not only a weapon, it was a reminder that their king was no longer bound by the limits of other men. But beyond the Trident, the lion's claws were stretching. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister convened a council. In the Tower of the Hand, lords and captains sat in tense silence while the old lion spoke, his words sharp as steel. "We face not merely a rebellious boy, but a dragon lord reborn. Do not delude yourselves, this is no minor skirmish. A single dragon leveled Harrenhal in the days of conquest. We must treat him as such a threat." Grandmaster Pycelle mumbled, "Of old scorpion engines used in Dawn, of bolts tipped with poison." Others suggested sending gold across the narrow sea for dragon binders or shadow binders. Cersei scoffed at all of it, her green eyes blazing. "It is a beast. It bleeds, it burns, it dies. My son is king. Let us march and show this wolf pup his fire means nothing." Tywin's gaze silenced her. "And if we march blindly, your son will be ashes on his throne." He turned to his captains. "Prepare every scorpion we can forge, double the gold for sellswords, and spread whispers through the riverlands. Every lord who bends the knee to Stark must know the lions. Vengeance will burn longer than dragonfire." Even as plans spun in the capital, further south in Dawn and across the narrow sea, the news of Robb's dragon spread like plague fire. In Sunspear, Prince Doran Martell murmured of the wheel of power turning anew. In Meereen, Daenerys Targaryen, impaced before her own beasts, rage stirring in her chest. Dragons were hers by birthright. Yet here was a wolf, wearing fire as if it were his own crown. Back in camp, Robb's counsel continued. Great Jon Umber slammed his fist on the table, rattling cups. "March south, boy. Take your dragon and burn. The red keep to its stones. Let the Lannisters squeal like pigs as their gold melts around them." Rose Bolton, quiet and cold as ever, leaned forward. "Victory breeds overconfidence. Dragons have been slain before. Harrenhal's ruin did not save House Hoare. Perhaps we should think of walls, of securing the north while the south tears itself apart." His pale eyes gleamed with something unreadable. Robb's jaw tightened. He did not trust Roose. His silence always stank of hidden knives. But the point gnawed at him. The north had suffered much. Winterfell still smouldered from Theon Greyjoy's treachery. His bannermen would follow him south, yes, but every mile took them farther from the lands they had sworn to protect. Catelyn placed her hand on his arm. "Your people need a king who guards them, not just one who chases vengeance." Robb looked at her, then back at the map, where the lion's sigil lay sprawled across the south. He felt the bond tugging at him, Skulldrake's restless presence burning in his chest, as though the dragon longed to scorch every golden banner from the earth. At last, Robb spoke. His voice was steady, but his eyes gleamed with fire. "We admire, but not blindly. The north must be secure before I put fire to the south. Winterfell must rise again, and my bannermen must know their homes are safe. Only then will I take this war to the Iron Throne." His lords grumbled, some in approval, others in frustration, but the decision was set. The north would be shored, up, rebuilt, made strong, and then unleashed. That night Robb walked to Skulldrake beneath the stars. The dragon raised his massive head, golden eyes glowing like twin furnaces. Robb rested his hand on the beast's snout and whispered, "Soon. The lions will feel your fire soon." Skulldrake rumbled deep, as though he understood, and the sound rolled out over the camp like a prophecy. The march northward was slower, heavier. The riverlands lay broken in Robb's wake, their villages smouldering from battles, their people caught between lion and wolf. To the small folk, it mattered little who ruled. They saw only ruin. Yet when Skulldrake's shadow crossed their fields, they fell to their knees, whispering prayers to gods, both old and new. Winterfell called. Robb's host moved steadily, up the Green Fork, through the debris of war. At every hall they passed, lords knelt, fearing dragonfire more than the weight of Lannister gold. Still whispers slithered through the night camps. Some men claimed no mortal should command such a beast, that Skulldrake was more curse than gift. Others spoke of how Harrenhal's lords had thought themselves immortal, only to find their castle a tomb. Catelyn heard these whispers, and they gnawed at her. She saw the distance growing in her son's eyes. Once Robb had laughed freely around his bannermen. Now his words were few, his gaze often turned skyward. She feared the fire had claimed part of him, burning away the boy she had raised. Roose Bolton's voice was the softest among his council, but it carried far. "Men fear you, my king," he said one night as they camped near the ruins of Darry. "Fear holds for a time, but fear alone breeds knives in the dark." Robb studied him with a wolf's suspicion. "And loyalty breeds what? More frays?" Bolton inclined his head, pale eyes unreadable. "Loyalty breeds silence. Fear breeds plots." It was not lost on Robb that Rose spoke as though he were both warning and confessing. By the time the banners of the direwolf crested the neck, the north was already stirring. Word had spread that their king returned not just with victories, but with a dragon. Men flocked to him from every holdfast, eager to see the beast with their own eyes. When Skulldrake descended on the marshlands of Moat Cailin, his roar shaking the old fortress stones, every garrisoned man of the Ironborn fled without a fight. The road to Winterfell was open. Yet what awaited was ruin. Theon Greyjoy's betrayal still scarred the castle. Its towers blackened, its people scattered, its hearths long cold. When Robb walked again through the gates of his boyhood home, the silence struck him harder than any battle. He placed his hand upon the charred stone and swore aloud, "Winterfell will rise again, and no one will ever burn it while I draw breath." Loyalty flared anew among his lords. The Great John swore oaths in his booming voice. The Manderleys promised ships and silver. The mountain clans pledged their steel. For a moment it seemed the north had grown unbreakable, but in the shadows the cracks widened. Roose Bolton lingered in silence, his pale gaze fixed often on the dragon more than on his king. His men whispered of dark letters sent by Raven, sealed with crimson wax. Though none could prove treachery, even grey wind bristled when Rose entered the council tent. Catelyn saw it too. "Do not trust him, Robb," she urged. "He wears silence like a cloak, but silence often hides daggers." Robb's jaw tightened. "If he plots, then let him plot. I have fire enough to burn every traitor root and branch." Still, the unease lingered. Word came swiftly that Tywin Lannister had withdrawn to Harrenhal, strengthening its scorched walls, gathering bannermen, forging scorpions of steel in secret. At the same time, rumors whispered of a silver-haired queen across the sea with 3 dragons of her own. And south in King's Landing, Joffrey raged louder than ever, but it was Queen Regent Cersei who had begun pouring coin into schemes of shadowbinders, alchemists, and poisoners. The game had grown darker. That night, as the northern host celebrated their return, Robb stood alone atop the broken walls of Winterfell. Skulldrake coiled below, his golden eyes reflecting the flames of torches, his breath steaming into the cold night. Robb felt the pull again, the dragon's hunger for fire, for conquest. It stirred inside him like a second heart, and for the first time Robb wondered not if he could control the dragon, but if the dragon had begun to control him. He whispered into the dark, "Am I still Robb Stark, or something else?" The dragon raised its head, loosing a growl low, and ancient as though it had answered him, "You are fire now, and fire consumes." Winterfell's halls echoed again with voices, though not the same as before. Where once the laughter of children and servants had filled the air, now only the heavy talk of warlords and the restless clatter of soldiers lingered. The castle still smelled of ash. Its broken towers stood like blackened teeth, reminders of how fragile even stone could be. But there was life again. Robb's men worked to raise new palisades, to fortify the walls with timber, to bring back what had been lost. The Manderley. Ships began sending grain upriver, and the mountain clans brought iron from the hills. 1,000 fires burned in the courtyards at night as men celebrated their king's return, and yet beneath the feasting, suspicion festered. Rose Bolton's men kept to themselves, their pale leech lord seldom smiling, seldom speaking. Grey. Wind growled whenever he drew near, his hackles rising as though scenting a predator in their midst. Many of the clansmen muttered that no man could be so quiet without carrying poison on his tongue. Catelyn whispered to her son in private, "Do not let him stand so close, Robb. The Boltons were once flayed into banners by the kings of winter for betrayal. Their blood runs cold and faithless." Robb's hand lingered on the pommel of his sword. "I know his nature, mother, but striking at him without cause would fracture the north." He paused, his eyes hard. "Still, if he bares his fangs, I'll feed him to Skulldrake myself." The dragon loomed larger every day, his wings now vast enough to cast shadows over the entire courtyard. The men no longer spoke in whispers of fear, but in songs of awe. Yet awe is a fragile thing, and awe can quickly turn to terror. One night, as the northern host feasted, a brawl broke out between Manderley men and Bolton soldiers. Knives flashed, blood was spilled. When Robb descended into the hall to restore order, Skulldrake roared from outside, shaking the very stones of Winterfell. The men fell silent in horror, many believing the beast had been stirred by their disloyalty. The fear kept them in line, but fear also drove them apart. Meanwhile, ravens brought troubling news from the south. Tywin Lannister had indeed taken Harrenhal, reforging its melted towers into strongholds bristling with scorpions. Word spread of wagons filled with bolts tipped in strange green fire, experiments of the Alchemists' Guild. Others whispered of priests from the east, shadowbinders paid in gold to seek ways to kill dragons. But what unsettled Robb most was word from across the sea. Daenerys Targaryen's name reached the north for the first time, carried by sailors who swore she commanded 3 dragons. If it were true, then his beast was no longer the only fire in the world. At night, Robb wrestled with these tidings. He would stand on Winterfell's battlements, watching the dragon coil and uncoil in the yard below, fire leaking from its nostrils. Sometimes he thought he heard whispers in his mind, thoughts not his own, rage, hunger, flame, a desire not only to defend but to burn, to conquer. Catelyn found him there one evening. "You've grown quiet, Robb." "I fear," he admitted, his voice low, "that this dragon is not only mine to command. Sometimes it feels as though I am his, too. When I sit upon him in flight, the fire sings to me. I think of burning not just enemies, but all who stand before me. It frightens me." Catelyn's face hardened with sorrow. "Then you must remember who you are. You are a Stark, Robb. You are not fire. You are winter. Do not let that beast change you." But as she left, Robb kept staring at the dragon, and he wondered whether winter was strong enough to hold back fire once it had taken root. The answer came quicker than he wished. A letter was found in the possession of a slain raven-keeper, sealed in red wax. It bore Rose Bolton's hand. Within were words of treachery, promises to the Lannisters, whispers of delivering the North if the price were right. When Robbie confronted him in the great hall, the men of the North gathered close, their hands on hilts, their eyes burning. Bolton's pale face betrayed nothing as he listened to the accusations. "You would sell us to the lions," Robb said, his voice echoing across the chamber. "After all we've bled." Bolton inclined his head slightly. "The lions offer order. Your fire offers only ruin. The boy who was king is dead. What remains is a dragon's puppet." The insult struck deeper than any sword. Grey wind snarled, and Skulldrake's roar split the air outside. Robb's hand trembled on his blade. He could kill Bolton then and there, end the treachery with a stroke, but to spill noble blood in Winterfell's hall would shatter the fragile unity of his bannermen. He forced his hand down, though the fire within him screamed for blood. "Get out of my sight," Robb growled, "but know this, the next time you bare your fangs, I'll burn your house from its roots." Bolton's pale eyes glimmered like a snake's. Then he turned and left the hall, his men slinking after him. The hall buzzed with voices, but none louder than the fire inside Robb's chest. Skulldrake's fury echoed in his bones, urging him to burn, to end all doubt in flame. But Robb Stark clenched his fists and whispered only to himself, "I will not become a monster." Yet the line between king and monster was burning thinner with each passing day. Winterfell breathed again, but it was a strange, uneasy breath. Smoke curled from new forges. Walls were patched with timber and stone. Soldiers drilled in the yard beneath the watchful eyes of their dragon. Skulldrake had grown even greater, his wings blotting the sky when he stretched them, his fire hot enough to melt the iron of gates in moments. But with his growth came unrest. Lords swore loyalty, yes, but in the dark their whispers betrayed fear. "What if the beast turns on us?" they muttered. "What if the boy is no longer a Stark at all?" Others whispered of the Targaryen queen across the sea, who bore not one dragon, but 3. Some wondered aloud if it would be wiser to bend knee to her than to follow a king who seemed half swallowed by fire. Robb felt the whispers claw at him. Every council meeting brought fresh tension. Men who once bled for him now glanced nervously when Skulldrake roared outside the walls. Even Catelyn's gaze had changed. Pride warred with unease in her eyes. Then came the Raven. It bore Tywin Lannister's seal, carried under the white flag of truce. The letter was short, cold and sharp. "Meet us at Harrenhal. We parley not with wolves, but with fire. Bring your dragon, or bring no words at all." The council raged. The Greatjon urged war at once, calling for Harrenhal to be put to flame. Rose Bolton, still untrusted yet still at the table, murmured that it was a trap. Even Catelyn begged Robb to remain in the north, to strengthen Winterfell, to let the lions rot in their own fear. But Robb's heart burned. He thought of the Red Wedding, of his men cut down under false banners, of Walder Frey's sneer before fire silenced him. He thought of his father's head upon a spike, of the South's endless treachery. "I will not hide," Robb said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the hall like thunder. "Let them scheme, let them dig their pits. I am the king in the north, and I will answer fire with fire." So it was that Robb rode south once more, this time not with the bulk of his host, but with a smaller company of sworn men and his mother at his side. Above, Skulldrake soared, the shadow of vengeance blotting the sun. Harrenhal rose before them days later, its melted towers like the bones of a giant, still scarred by Aegon's wrath a century past. There, in the courtyard, Tywin Lannister stood in his crimson cloak, calm as stone. Beside him, rows of scorpions gleamed in the sunlight, bolts tipped with wildfire glistening green. The parley began in brittle silence. Tywin's words were measured, his voice like steel drawn slowly from a sheath. "You believe the beast at your side makes you a god," he said. "But dragons have died before. Do not mistake fire for immortality. House Stark has ruled the North for thousands of years and never needed fire. You are not a king anymore, Robb Stark. You are a boy on a leash, held by a monster." Robb's chest burned with fury, but he held it back. "You mistake me, Lord Tywin. I am no boy, and I hold no leash. The dragon is mine, as the North is mine." For a moment, silence stretched. Even the wind seemed to hush. Then, from the towers, the first scorpion bolt loosed. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Bolts hissed through the air, some shattering stone, others finding only smoke. One scraped Skulldrake's flank, drawing a roar so deafening it rattled Harrenhal's melted bones. Fire spewed from his maw, sweeping across the siege engines, melting iron, turning men into torches. Robb leapt into the saddle as soldiers screamed below. The bond surged through him, fire and fury pouring into his veins. He rose into the sky atop Skulldrake, the dragon's wings sending gales that toppled men like leaves. Below, Tywin Lannister did not flinch, even as flames scorched the ground at his feet. "Kill the rider!" he roared. Arrows darkened the sky, bolts streaked upward, some struck true, piercing scale and drawing shrieks of pain. Robb's vision blurred with fire and smoke, his heart pounding with the dragon's rage. He felt the beast's hunger for destruction, its call to burn all, not just the Lannisters, but Harrenhal, the Riverlands, everything in reach. For a moment Robb nearly gave in. He saw it in his mind, a sea of fire, his enemy's ash, his crown unchallenged. He would not be a boy or a king, he would be legend. But then he heard his mother's voice, faint but clear, carried on the roar of battle. "Robb, you are a Stark!" The fire faltered. The boy within the king fought the beast's hunger. With gritted teeth, Robb pulled back, forcing Skulldrake to wheel away from the killing field. The dragon shrieked in fury, but obeyed. When the smoke cleared, Harrenhal still stood, though half its engines burned. Tywin lived, his golden armor blackened but unbroken, and Robb Stark soared into the clouds, his heart torn between the wolf he was and the fire he had become. That night in the skies above the Trident, Robb whispered into the wind, "If I must be fire, I will be fire for the North, not against it." Skulldrake growled low, as though doubting, as though hungering still. And so ended the first chapter of the Wolf of Fire, not in victory, not in defeat, but in a struggle deeper than any battle. For the war was no longer only against lions and traitors. It was within himself. Would Robb Stark remain the young wolf who fought for his people, or would the fire consume him until only the dragon remained? Only the gods knew.